The amount showing on the screen made absolutely no sense. I quickly blinked, figuring my eyes were messing with me after I'd spent ages staring at the laptop. But the number stayed the same, $400,000. It was my brother Tyler's trust fund, the one that nobody had thought to bring up while I'd been the one taking care of his expenses for 6 years. I only found out about it because I was in the process of writing another check for the property taxes on our family's lake house, something I'd paid for but barely got to see. Dad had sent the tax notice over with his standard short message. "Jenna, deal with this." It wasn't really a question. It was more like an order, like I was still the good daughter whose financial well-being was something the family could depend on. However, there it was, right there in the PDF. A mention of the T. Sullivan Trust, with a staggering balance, tossed off casually in the county property records I'd never looked at previously. My hands were shaking as I opened up my own financial records. 6 years of helping my little brother out while he was figuring things out. 6 years of covering his car insurance, his medical costs, and his rent when he ran short. 6 years of the lake house's upkeep, the property taxes, plus family emergencies that always seemed to need my money. $125,000. That's the sum I'd given them. $125,000 while they had a trust fund that could have easily handled everything 4 times over. I decided to call my mother first, making sure I sounded calm. "Hey, Mom, just a quick question about the lake house taxes." "Oh dear, I'm so relieved you're taking care of that. Dad's been incredibly worried about money lately." I clutched the phone a little harder. I found something peculiar while looking at the property deeds. Tyler's trust fund, the one worth $400,000. A moment of quiet. Then, "Well, that's tricky. Your grandfather specifically established that for Tyler's future. It isn't meant for daily needs." "And what about my money? The $125,000 I've given, believing we were all having a tough time." Again, silence. Then the usual tactic. "Jenna, you've always been the dependable one. Tyler requires more assistance. You know how he is." "Oh yes, I did. The favored child. The one who always had to be shielded, no matter what the cost, evidently my cost." I ended the call and gazed at the tax check I was about to pay. Methodically, I ripped it into small bits, watching them drift down onto my kitchen counter like celebratory streamers. "No more," I murmured to my quiet apartment. "Not another single cent." I couldn't fall asleep that night. Instead, I made some spreadsheets. At precisely 2:18 a.m., I finalized a complete ledger of every penny I'd given my family over the last 6 years. Every item was carefully listed. Tyler's spending, lake house upkeep, family crises. Alongside it, I put up a second column, family support given to me. That column remained completely blank. I phoned Marion, my financial advisor, the following morning. She listened attentively as I related the information I'd uncovered and then let out a big sigh. "Jenna, I've been wanting to discuss this with you for ages. The financial support you've been providing your family is not something that will ensure your long-term financial well-being." "You already knew," my voice almost broke. "I realized you were overextending yourself. I wasn't aware of the trust fund, though." She hesitated for a moment. "This habit, it's financial exploitation. Even when it's with family, there's a formal term for it." The term exploitation stung, as if I'd been physically struck. It was one thing to suspect it, and an entirely different experience to label it as such. "What should I do now?" I questioned. "Keep detailed records of everything, get expert assistance, and above all else, stop the flow of money." 3 days later, I received a text from Tyler on my phone. "Hey sis, I hate to ask, but could you lend me $2,800 for car repairs? My transmission failed." I looked at the message, and for the first time, something stood out. His profile picture showed him at a beach resort holding a drink. I opened up Instagram and reviewed his recent posts. He was tagged at an exclusive restaurant 2 days ago. The caption read, "Sometimes you need to indulge." The check I'd written for his car payment was still on my counter. I ripped it up as well. My phone buzzed again. An email from my mother. "Jenna, dear, we're concerned about losing the lake house if those taxes aren't paid quickly. Your father is very anxious." I scrolled through my pictures, and eventually I found what I was seeking, screenshots I'd saved from my parents' social media feeds that I hadn't really looked at before. They were there at the lake house last week, spending time with friends on the deck that I had the money to rebuild last summer. The caption said, A perfect day at our little haven. There was no mention of who actually financed this haven. And there was Tyler, chilling in the boat I'd assisted him in purchasing, lifting a beer and a toast. I hadn't been invited. I reflected on all the weekends I had worked extra hours to be able to afford these family costs, while they were enjoying the benefits of my efforts without me. Then my dad's voicemail started. "Jenna, it's unusual for you to neglect your family duties. Call me back right away." Family obligations. I replayed the message, hearing the things I'd overlooked for ages, the assumption, the privilege, the complete failure to say thank you. I didn't call him back. Instead, I contacted a forensic accountant. "They're freaking out," Claire said, pushing a glass of wine my way across her kitchen counter. We'd been friends since our college days, and she was the first one I told everything to. "You've completely flipped the script without any warning." "I didn't realize we were even playing a game," I answered. "That's because you were the only one following different rules." She pointed at my spreadsheets. "This is amazing, by the way, very detailed." I wanted to confirm I wasn't overreacting. I'm not, honestly. I've actually been downplaying my reactions for a long time now. She took a drink of her wine. "So, what's the strategy, aside from completely severing ties with them?" I paused for a moment. "I want them to fully comprehend the extent of their actions, not just the damage to my money, but the damage they caused me, my sense of trust. I want them to confront it, all of it, without any more deceit or attempts to control things. They'll deny it all. They'll turn things around and cast you as the bad guy." "Not if I have absolute proof." I retrieved my phone, showing her an email I'd gotten that morning from my Aunt Rebecca, my dad's sister. "Jenna, I believe I should give you a heads up. Your father has scheduled a family meeting for this Sunday at the lake house. He's telling everyone you've experienced some sort of emotional collapse and walked away from your obligations. I don't know the real story, but this doesn't sound like you." Claire's eyes grew wider. "He's calling in support." "Precisely, therefore I need to be prepared." I met her gaze directly. "And I need people to back me up who aren't already on his side." My coworker Mark, who was a lawyer, specialized in family financial abuse cases. When I explained my predicament, he volunteered to assist me free of charge. "This is a more frequent problem than you might imagine," he stated, as he examined my documents. "The favored child, the dependable child, the parent who uses finances to control things. It's a textbook family financial situation." "I just want what's right," I replied. He glanced up from the papers. "What exactly does right mean? Do you want your money back?" That thought crossed my mind. It would be great to have $125,000, but honestly, I don't expect to ever get it. Honestly, what I crave is for them to recognize what they've done. I just want them to acknowledge it and see the truth of it. Also, I want this situation to end, not just for me personally, but for good. He told me, "We have to get you ready for anything that could happen. Dealing with family when it comes to money can get really, really bad." We spent the next 3 days working out a plan. I dug up all my bank statements, created some comparison charts, and gathered social media proof that showed just how different their claims of being broke were from the way they were actually living, all funded by me. By Sunday, I felt ready. I put all my evidence in a leather portfolio, got dressed in a fresh white blouse and some black pants, and went to the lake house, which I hadn't been to in ages. The Sullivan family lake house was on really good waterfront land, a huge house of cedar and glass that had been in the family for years and years. What no one really knew was that it almost got taken by the bank 6 years ago, until I gave my first family contribution. As I drove up to the house and into the circled driveway, I noticed all the cars. My dad had definitely called in the entire family, aunts, uncles, and cousins. All the people who respected him and who would probably take his side unless they had a good reason not to. I noticed Tyler's Audi parked close to the front door, the car I had helped buy. I patted the leather portfolio on the seat for a bit of comfort, and then I picked up the small projector I'd brought with me. The instant I reached the door, Mom swung it open. Her smile seemed strained, filled with worry. "Jenna, everyone's assembled in the living room. Your father's eager to get started." There was no embrace, no welcoming words. It became instantly clear that this was an intervention aimed squarely at me. As I walked into the great room, it went utterly quiet. My relatives were sitting in a haphazard circle, giving off the feeling of a jury. Dad was in the middle, his body stiff, barely concealing his rage. Tyler was sprawled in a chair, avoiding eye contact. "Jenna," my dad declared, using the commanding tone I'd grown up with. "We've gathered here because we're worried. Your actions lately, refusing to assist with household costs, not answering our calls, making accusations, they're out of character." I placed my portfolio and projector on the coffee table, taking my time. "You're correct, Dad. It's not like me, but I'm not the person I used to be." A look of bewilderment passed over his features. He wasn't expecting this calm assurance. "For the past 6 years," I said on, "I've given this family over $125,000. I've covered Tyler's debts, paid for the taxes and upkeep of this house, and responded to every financial crisis without hesitation." I began setting up the projector. "I did this thinking we were all weathering hard times together, that my assistance was crucial for our family's stability." My father took a step closer. "Nobody made you help, Jenna. You volunteered." Did I actually offer, or was I trained to feel obligated? Was I convinced it was my job to do so? I turned to face everyone after plugging in the projector. "Last week, I stumbled upon something pretty revealing, something that none of you shared with me." The projector sprang to life, illuminating the stone fireplace. I pulled up my meticulously planned presentation, a basic slide showcasing 2 numbers. Jenna's contribution, $125,000. Tyler's trust fund, $400,000. A ripple of whispers spread across the room. My Aunt Rebecca's eyes grew wide with surprise. I asked, trying to sound calm despite my rapidly beating heart, "Can anyone clarify why I've been covering Tyler's costs when he has access to a trust fund that's 4 times larger than what I've put in?" "That money is for Tyler's future, not for everyday needs," my dad stated sharply. I clicked to the next slide, which outlined exactly where my money had been spent. "What about my money? Car payments, insurance, medical bills, property taxes, utilities, and vacations I never got to join." My Uncle Robert shifted forward. "You're saying you paid for all of that?" "Every single penny," I confirmed, "all while working 60-hour weeks and putting my own goals on hold." The next few slides displayed the Instagram posts. My family enjoying the lake house, Tyler's extravagant activities, and my parents' trips, all while they were telling me about their financial struggles. Tyler finally spoke, sounding resentful. "This isn't right. You're making us look terrible." I simply presented the proof, as you all have done. My dad's complexion was now an unsettling crimson. "That's it. Turn that off right now. This is a private matter, not a formal report." I replied in a composed manner. "It turned into a presentation when you invited everyone. You wanted them to hear your side of it. Now they're hearing mine." Eliza, my cousin, chimed in. "Uncle James, is any of this accurate? Jenna's been covering everything while Tyler has a trust fund." My father avoided the question. He exited, slamming the French doors behind him. My mom began to cry, and these weren't the fake tears I was used to, they were real. "Jenna, we never intended to harm you. We just thought, since you were doing so well, that my success meant my finances belonged to the family, while Tyler's were kept safe." I turned off the projector. "I'm not asking for my money. I don't need compensation. All I want is recognition of what occurred and for it to never happen again." The atmosphere in the room had changed. The group had broken up, people forming smaller clusters and murmuring. My Aunt Rebecca came over and held my hand. "I had no clue, Jenna. None of us did." Tyler got up, raking his fingers through his hair. "I wasn't aware of the extent of your contributions," he said softly. "I mean, I knew you assisted, but not all of this." I looked at my brother, the favored child, the one with all the advantages, and saw a new emotion on his face. It was shame. Money wasn't really the issue, I explained to everyone there. What really got to me was the dishonesty, the way they twisted things and took advantage of people, calling it family duty. That stops now. I gathered my stuff and left, never once looking back at the mess I was leaving behind. For the first time in 6 years, I felt weightless, released from what I had to do. Free. The weeks following the event my cousins now called the Lake House Reckoning turned out to be pretty calm. I separated myself from all family finances. I ignored messages about money and started taking care of myself. Nothing disastrous happened. Everything just continued on somehow. And oddly enough, I didn't experience the heavy guilt I was sure I would. A few family members contacted me privately to let me know they supported me. My Aunt Rebecca asked me to have lunch with her, and she apologized for not realizing what was really going on before. Even my mom texted, admitting they had taken advantage of your kindness. It wasn't complete acceptance of responsibility, but it was a beginning. The real shock was 3 weeks after the fight, when Tyler called and asked if we could meet for coffee. He showed up at the cafe looking changed. He seemed less put together, more disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes that indicated he hadn't slept well. "You look awful," I told him as he sat down in the booth. He managed a weak grin. "Thanks, you look well though, better than at the lake house." "Feeling free is good for me," I said, taking a look at him. "Why did you want to meet?" I nervously played with the coffee mug in my hands. "I've been doing a lot of reflecting recently, and—" He paused. "You were correct about everything." I just kept quiet, giving him no pressure. I didn't realize before how much they always preferred me, always sheltered me, and how much they took from you. He glanced up. "I've been seeing a counselor. She says it's a classic situation in families, the favorite and the dutiful one." "That doesn't undo what happened, Tyler." "I know nothing can, but I want to attempt something anyway." He got out a folder. "I spoke with a lawyer. I want to give you 30% ownership of the lake house." I was stunned, unable to speak. "It already belongs to you, really," he went on. "You've already paid for it, you've taken care of it, you ought to own part of it." "Dad will absolutely lose it," I said, picturing my father's furious reaction. Tyler's expression hardened. "Let him, I'm no longer willing to be his puppet." For the very first time, I saw something different in my brother, strength, something beyond the spoiled child he was taught to be. "What makes you want to do this?" I asked. He thought about it. "Because I want my sister back, not just as someone to use, but as family, actual family." He slid the folder over to me. "This is a beginning." I didn't put my signature on the documents that day. Trust doesn't just get rebuilt with one act. But I took the folder home, a physical representation of a change starting to happen in the power balance in our family. A couple of days after, a high-end gift basket showed up at my place. It was filled with fancy wines, fancy food, and a gift card to a spa. The card's message was short: "We need to chat." I shot back a quick text: "I'm not interested in stuff. What I want is a shift in things." His response arrived fast: "Tell me what you want." I immediately called Tyler. "Dad sent a peace offering," I informed him. "He wants to know my terms." Tyler let out a long breath. "That's Dad all over, thinks everything can be bought." "It can," I answered, "but not in the way he thinks." That night we spent hours planning, working together. It had been years since we'd been on the same side. By the next day, we had a plan. I sent my father a text: "Dinner, Vincenzo's, Thursday at 7, both you and Mom, I'll make the booking." Vincenzo's was my dad's go-to restaurant, the spot where he conducted his business deals. I picked it on purpose, a neutral ground where he couldn't take charge like he did at home, yet was familiar enough that he wouldn't be too uncomfortable. They showed up precisely on time, looking perfect as ever. Mom gave me a hesitant hug. Dad gave a tight nod. We made it through the starters with only small talk. When the main course was served, my dad cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have talked about this. We understand we've leaned on your money more than we should have." His words were measured, like he'd practiced them. "We're willing to make some changes moving forward." I put my fork down. "Changes within reasonable bounds," he added. "Family looks after each other, Jenna, that's a constant." "Everything evolves," I countered. "And I'm not open to discussion. My purpose here is to spell out my unyielding terms if we're to maintain any connection going forward." My mom's hand shook as she reached for her glass of water. My dad's face grew stern. "First," I stated, "complete financial independence. I won't be contributing to family finances, covering Tyler's debts, or helping with the lake house in the future, unless I freely choose to give a gift, not because I'm forced to. Second, everyone will attend family therapy. All of us together, confronting the unhealthy behaviors that got us to this point." My dad started to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. "Third, both siblings will be treated the same way. Whatever Tyler gets, I get too. Whatever I must do, so must he. Fourth, the entire family must publicly acknowledge the favoritism and financial exploitation that happened. No more pretending, no more using people. My mother wept quietly. My father's expression was a picture of icy anger. Those aren't terms, they are ultimatums, he said. They're prerequisites, I corrected. For you to have me in your life, accept them or reject them. And if we say no, he questioned. I stared back at him without flinching. Then you lose a daughter, forever. The room fell completely quiet. For the first time ever, I saw doubt in my father's eyes. The power dynamic had changed, and he knew it. I mentioned that Tyler is giving me a share of the lake house. I'm getting 30%, and he's already begun on the necessary documents. My dad immediately retorted that he couldn't do that without our okay. I countered, he's able to actually. He's 28, Dad, the trust is under his name. I gave a small grin. You set it up like that, recall, to safeguard his resources. A look came over my father's face, a moment when he understood that his prized son, the one he'd crafted, was no longer following his lead. The foundations he'd put in place were collapsing. We need to talk about this, my mother stated quietly. Take as long as you require, I said back, gesturing for the check. But know this, these aren't just ideas. This is what it has to be if you want me in your lives. I paid the check, a small, final twist of fate, and left them there, my father's meticulously built world of control falling apart before him. Half a year later, we were in Dr. Levinson's office for our weekly family therapy session. It had been slow going, difficult, but also genuine. Tyler had visibly altered the most, handling his money, getting a steady job for the first time, even paying back a portion of his debt to me, even though I never requested it. My mom had a hard time with her habit of enabling, but she was learning to recognize it. My dad fought it the longest, but when it looked like he might lose both his children, he finally started the tough job of looking at his controlling actions. Personally, I'd achieved more than just financial freedom. I'd finally found my true self, established my limits, and learned that a family could function without being taken advantage of, yet only if I stayed alert and set clear boundaries. The paperwork to transfer ownership of the lake house was finished. That place, which once represented my being used, now meant something else. A small success, a real recognition of my effort, a place I could visit when I chose to. That particular weekend, we met there, not because my father demanded it, but by everyone's consent. The old mahogany dining table where he'd once been the center of attention was gone, swapped out for a pine farmhouse table. No special chair for the head of the table, just equal spots surrounding the dining area. I've been giving it some thought, my mom said once we were done eating dinner, about all the family financial documents Jenna put together. I became slightly uncomfortable, still cautious about bringing up certain subjects. They were incredibly comprehensive, really detailed, she continued. It made me understand, Jenna, you have a talent for this, for helping people understand their own financial situations. My father gave a nod, a behavior I never would have seen a year earlier. Your presentation was useful. Harsh but needed, Tyler added, a small smile playing on his lips. I've been helping a women's shelter, I replied, surprised that I was sharing this information. Teaching financial literacy. Many of the women there have also been victims of financial exploitation, just in varying ways. That's fantastic, my mom said, and for the first time her enthusiasm seemed sincere. That night after dinner, as we were on the deck, gazing at the sunset over the lake, my dad came outside where I was, while everyone else stayed indoors. I've been wanting to share something, he began, his voice sounding rough but surprisingly humble. I'm really impressed with what you're doing with those women. I gave him a questioning look. You are? Yeah, he gazed out at the lake. You've transformed something really hard into something valuable. That says a lot about who you are. It wasn't an apology like the ones he'd offered in therapy, hesitant, incomplete, but genuine in their own way. This was something else entirely. It felt like he was acknowledging who I'd become, maybe because of, or maybe in spite of, everything we'd been through. I started a scholarship, I told him. It's called the Sullivan Women's Financial Independence Scholarship. It's for women who are getting back on their feet after financial abuse. He slowly nodded. That's a great thing to leave behind. We sat quietly after that, watching the sky darken. Not fixed, not ideal, but something genuine, a connection founded on honesty rather than deceit. The wisdom I now held was gained the hard way and at a great price. The spreadsheets I'd worked on at 2:18 a.m. had grown into something I called the family ledger. It was no longer simply a record of my abuse, but also a teaching instrument, a warning, and a guide for others stuck in the same situations. Our support group, which I started with Claire, had expanded, uniting individuals nationwide who had survived family financial abuse. I found that we all discussed our experiences, shared coping mechanisms, and went through the lengthy, difficult process of regaining control over our lives. I discovered that the true essence of revenge isn't about causing damage. Rather, it's about putting yourself back together, getting back what was stolen, and making something positive out of the mess. As I strolled along the shoreline by myself, feeling the cool sand between my toes, it struck me that I was feeling something different, being fully present without figuring out the price of this moment. It wasn't about money, emotional effort, or personal boundaries I had compromised. The water softly touched my feet, dissolving old habits and the things I anticipated. I hadn't absolved everything, and I would never fully do so. Some things can't be fixed, but I'd found something greater than compensation: liberation. The house lights were bright against the dark evening behind me. 30% was mine, completely under my control. The accounting was finally done,